Now, this morning, I'm going to talk about a story that you've heard a million times, the birth of Jesus Christ. But I'm going to do it in a little different way, because I'm a little different. Ask Ruth, she'll tell you. We're going to go into depth. You know, we all know the story in Luke chapter 2, and we've all heard it so many times, but maybe there's some things you didn't know that you might be able to pick up and understand the story a little bit better. So turn to Luke chapter 2, if you would, please. Luke's going to provide the details, but we're going to, like I said, dig a little bit deeper. Luke chapter 2. Let me see if I can find it. I'm going to read just the first 7 verses, and then we'll talk about it. Luke 2, 1 through 7. It came to pass in those days that there went out a decree from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be registered or taxed. And this registration was first made when Quirinius was the governor of Syria. And all went to be registered, everyone into his own city. And Joseph also went up from Galilee, out of the city of Nazareth, unto Judea, unto the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and lineage of David, to be registered with Mary, his espoused wife, being great with child. And so it was that while they were there, the days were accomplished that she should be delivered. And she brought forth her firstborn son, wrapped him in swaddling clothes, laid him in a manger, because there was no room for them in the inn. This is the story we all know. No room for them in the inn. And we're going to look at that a little bit later and see what actually it was that they were looking for and where they stayed. Now, I'm going to, before we get into this, ask you a question. How did we get from such a simple, beautiful story of this to the Christmas we have today? Anybody know? I'm going to tell you, okay? Listen closely. I don't usually read stuff, but I can't remember all this, so just listen. About the middle of the 4th century, right in the time of establishing of the great world empire of Rome under Constantine, the Bishop of Jerusalem wrote to the Bishop of Rome. He asked him to determine the actual date of Christ's birth. Well, no one knows the actual date of Christ's birth. The fact of the matter is, we don't even know for sure the actual year of his birth. But the Bishop of Rome sent word back to the Bishop of Jerusalem that it occurred on December 25th. By the end of the 4th century, they had been accepted by the church, was really put into the church first. And church law, it became regularly accepted as the day to celebrate the birth of Christ. Was Jesus born on December 25th? Okay. Most scholars would tell you today, if not all of them, that the bishop didn't know the day of Christ's birth because we don't know the date of Christ's birth. December 25th is purely arbitrary. You want to know why? Listen. But he didn't do it for purely arbitrary reasons. It was a fairly shrewd guy. He had a reason for putting the celebration of the birth of Christ on December 25th. And here's the reason. For centuries before Christ was born, the month of December had been an occasion long established and still being celebrated at that time as a pagan festival of significance. In fact, most boisterous pagan rivalries were celebrated in December. It marked the the winter, and great celebration was held in anticipation of the coming spring. Nothing was going on in December. It was just cold and dreary, and they're all looking forward to spring. Everything around was dark and dreary, and trees were without leaves. Things didn't grow. In the midst of the winter, they put on these great celebrations for the hope of the return of the sun, the return of the strength, or the sun to bring back the spring. and make things grow and warm up the cold. Feasting was a part of it. Parties were part of it. Adorning your house with evergreens, anticipating those deciduous trees and plants that would bloom. They even adorned their houses with mistletoe. You guys don't know what mistletoe is, do you? Do you ever use it? No? Well, when did you kiss your wife? Isn't that when she stands under the mistletoe? That's the tradition. The exchange of gifts was a general merrymaking held at the time of the year of the pagans. This is all part of the traditional pagan celebration. Now, the bishop's idea was this is such an orgy. This is sort of a carnival in the modern world. This is the worst of a pagan decadence celebrated. The bishop's idea was, let's take the birth of Christ, now listen to this, and put it on the same day around the same time to coincide with the ancient festivals and all the winter revelries. In that way, we will bring sanctifying influence into the celebration, draw the attention of the people away from the things they were engaged in and to more spiritual pursuits, and start making them think about the fact that God came into the world in a human form. Pretty good idea, huh? Watch. That was a nice thought. Let's sanctify these celebrations by imposing on the same day the celebration of the birth of Christ. Well, needless to say, the heathen festivals never missed a beat. They kept on going at the same pace they were always going on. And the church, which frowned on them, wanted to change them, finally accepted them, and let them be assimilated into the celebration of Christmas. Isn't that the way it is? Instead of protesting against it, they just assimilate it. So that today, Christmas is a conglomeration of all that is distinctly Christian and biblical and all that is distinctly pagan. Okay? This was the 4th century this happened. Is it the same today? Is it? Sure. To the Romans, for example, the winter Christmas December festival, this feasting and orgy was called Saturnalia, named after Saturn, who was the god of agriculture. It was the one who presided over the planting of crops. During the time of the celebration of Saturnalia, gift giving was the most popular custom. That's where we get this from. The most common gifts of Saturnalia were small idols, small deities, small gods, replica of the Roman gods made out of clay, sometimes marble and sometimes silver. How many of you will get that on Christmas morning? Candles were used extensively in their idolatrous celebration. Evergreen branches were given to friends to hang on their houses, and sometimes trinkets were placed on these evergreen branches, the forerunners, what we today as Christmas decorations. Okay? Did you know this? Okay. In the really barbaric Northlands, among the Norsemen, a similar winter festival was held. It was called Yule, or Yuletide, as we refer to it. It was in honor of the gods Odin and Thor. It involved feasting and music, drinking, or drunkenness from horns. In Persia, fires were kindled to the god Mithra. If you know anything about the legend, you know Mithra was believed to be the god of light. And so at the time of the year when the daylight was briefer than another time, winter was on them, they would pray and celebrate to the God of light in anticipation of the sun in the spring and summer. In England, it was the Druids who gathered sacred mistletoe. They made live sacrifices to their many gods. Mistletoe, by the way, was venerated by the English. It was venerated by the Druids. It was venerated by a lot of pagans in the pre-Christmas times. The Druids, for example, gathered mistletoe during their December celebration. They had some priests. They would get a few white-clad priests. They would march to a sacred oak tree with a large entourage where the mistletoe would grow. And then would they have the chief priest climb the tree. He would go with a golden sickle. He would cut the plant, which would fall from the tree and be caught in a cloth so not to defile by touching the ground. Then 2 white oxen were sacrificed and the mistletoe given to the people to hang in their homes. Now the mistletoe was supposed to be an emblem of peace, an emblem of great fortune. And whenever the tradition of the Druids was, whenever an enemy passed under the mistletoe, you have to embrace the enemy, and it was supposedly a little ploy to try to help people reconcile their differences by kissing under the mistletoe, which is some elevated form of the original. That's where it came from. Adding to that, you have the drama of the crib, or the creche, the manger scene, which was popularized by St. Francis in the 13th century. 300 years after Martin Luther, of all people, brought a tree into his house at the season of Christmas and decorated it with candles. He said he would put the candles on it to simulate the starry sky glittering over the stable where Christ was born. But long before, pagans had used boughs of evergreens decorated with trinkets to celebrate their own pagan holidays. In Holland, there was a favorite saint named Saint Nicholas. The white-bearded bishop of Asia Minor was believed to have appeared around December 6th, riding a white horse, leaving gifts for good children and leaving switches for the parents of the bad children. And anybody ever get a switch or a coal in your stocking? No. And he would leave one or the other on the porch. The Dutch called it Saint Nicholas, Sinterklaas, from which we get the derivative of Santa Claus. Caroling started in the 14th century along with jesters and musicians and mummers. There's still a mummers parade. We know where that is, right? That's where it started back here. Stockings would then be hung. Now, stockings, where did they come from? Where did your Christmas stockings come from? Well, it was believed in Holland that St. Nicholas, when he was dropping his switches and his good stuff on the porch, on some occasions threw coins down a chimney, and they just happened to land in some stockings hanging there to dry. Out of that, the whole idea that Santa Claus comes down the chimney and fills the stockings. Christmas cards were first printed in London in 1846 at the request of Sir Henry Cole, who was owner of an art shop. And the Christmas cards first printed all showed merry drinking scenes. They were the first Christmas cards, Mary in a drinking scene. About that time, about middle 19th century, the celebration of Christmas was accepted by the church in the United States and became a regular part of church life. See, it wasn't always that way here. When the old bishop might have had a good motive for what he did, but it didn't help. Putting the birth of Jesus Christ on the same day as the rest of this only served to clutter the celebration of the birth of Christ. Christ with a whole lot of unrelated pagan elements. That's why I say it's kind of refreshing to get to know this so we know what we're doing. Now, let's look at see what Luke has to say about this. Have these traditions carried on? Yes. I'm not here this morning to preach against Christmas. I'm not even going to preach against Santa Claus because that's not my thing. But we have to understand that we've taken this simple story of Luke chapter 2 and we made it into who knows what. Now, my purpose for doing this is to make us understand that there's more to Christmas than this. It's nice to have friends and family and have a good time and eat, give gifts. I'm not against that at all. But I think it's taken on a new outlook for us in America. Now, the last verse of this chapter 2 section, there was no room for them in the inn. Is that a fact or a legend? What do you think? It's in the Bible, so it's a fact, correct? It's not a legend, it's a fact. No vacancies. It was late. They needed a place to sleep. Mary was about to deliver her baby. Desperation, probably in Joseph, was great. Why? I want you to talk to me this morning a little bit. We want to look at this. Why was he so desperate? Huh? They were going to have a baby. Is that an exciting time? Yeah, it is. And he had no place to call home at this. There was no mother there for Mary. There was no relatives. There was no friends. It was just Joseph. Probably Joseph was about 14 or 15, and Mary was probably about 13 when this all happened. They had traveled 90 miles from Nazareth, where they lived, to get here. Now, do you think they took the Greyhound bus? Do you think they had Uber? What kind of a ride do you think it was for pregnant 9-month Mary on a bumpy road riding on a donkey? Wasn't easy. It wasn't easy. They get to where they're going, no room. Mary, 9 months pregnant. Mary was betrothed to Joseph. She was a virgin. She was a virgin. Now, we talk about miraculous births. Has there ever been another birth like this? What about cloning? Think about it. Have they ever cloned a human being? No, not that we know of, right, John? They clone animals and sheep and things like that, but we don't know that they ever cloned a person. If you look in chapter 1, verse 26, just go back a page. In the 6th month, the angel Gabriel was sent from God unto a city of Galilee named Nazareth. This is where Mary and Joseph lived. This is their home, okay? If you look in verse 32, please, what does the angel say? He shall be great, shall be called the Son of the Highest, and the Lord shall give him unto him the throne of his father David. Mary and Joseph were both in the line of David, in their lineage, okay? Look at verse 37. What is Mary's response? She's a virgin. She's never been with a man. She's 13 years old. What would your response be? First of all, you'd be scared to death because they hadn't seen angels for a long time. Remember the 400 years of silence? There was no angels. There was no prophets. So Mary comes across Gabriel, and she's probably scared to death. Doesn't understand it. Hasn't had any idea that this was coming. But look what Mary's response was. For with God, nothing shall be impossible. Is that faith? It sure is. A baby miraculously conceived by God. But I told you last week, how do you think she explained it to her mother and her father and her relatives? Who's the father? That's the first thing they'd ask. God. Do you think she got any ridicule? And I'll tell you, I said last week too, that's why she went to see her cousin Elizabeth, because Joseph wanted to get her out of town. She was probably catching a lot of heat, and she was starting to show. So basically, she went to see her cousin Elizabeth to kind of get rid of some of the criticism that she and he might get. Now, Mary is full term, okay? And just like everyone's other birth physically, this was no different physically, the birth. But it was a significant birth, wasn't it? Now, was Jesus born with a halo on his head? Was he born with a lot of royal regalia, robes and all? No. We're going to see what they wrapped him in. Here's the world setting at the time, because I think we need to understand this. It says here in chapter 2, verse 1, came to pass in those days there went out a decree from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be registered. Okay? What's another word for registered? A census. Now, who was Caesar Augustus? Well, Caesar Augustus wasn't really his name. His name was Gaius Octavius, and he was known as Octavian. Now, Augustus is a term that they use for somebody that's very prominent and very important, I guess. Caesar is the name they used for the king or the emperor. It's like Pharaoh. Pharaoh wasn't the Pharaoh's name in the book of Genesis. That was his title. So basically, Caesar Augustus was a very popular and powerful person. Now, can I tell you a little bit about him? Would you like to know, or are you not into this? It's kind of important to know who these people are. How many of you never heard who Caesar Augustus was? We read it all the time, but we don't know who he was or what importance it had. His mother was Atia. She was the sister of Julius Caesar. So basically, he was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. You know who Julius Caesar was. That made him the grandnephew of Julius Caesar. Now, Julius Caesar got a liking for this boy. And at 20 years old, he adopted him as his son. 1 year later, Julius Caesar was killed. Who killed Julius Caesar? Brutus, A2 Brute. He stabbed him in the back. Octavius became the heir to Julius Caesar. What do you think that meant? Money, power. One of Octavius's sisters married Mark Antony. Not Mark Antony the singer, but Mark Antony. He was very powerful in the Empire of Rome and became a very, very powerful person. At Caesar's death, 3 men ruled. When Julius Caesar was killed, a triumvirate, 3 men ruled the country. Lepidus, Octavius, and Mark Antony. Lepidus fell out of favor and they got rid of him. Mark Antony, he left his wife, Octavius' sister. And who do you think he ran off with? Cleopatra, the queen of Egypt. And he got to the point in his career where he cared more about the Egyptians than he did the Romans, so they got rid of him too. Now, Caesar Augustus, who caused this census, was very, very prominent, as I said. He declared Pax Romana. Pax Romana is world peace. There had not been peace at all until this time, but for the whole world there was peace. He also did a road system for the Roman people. Some of them were actually paved, not with blacktop like we have, but with stones. He did a lot to improve the country. And also at this time, because the roads were improved and the peace was in effect, it was a lot easier for the missionaries, Paul and the other ones, to go to the other churches. Because they couldn't before. There was no good road system. There was no good, it wasn't safe. Basically, Paul was able to carry the gospel all over the world. Who was the first one to carry the gospel? Mary. What do you think about that? Mary was the first one to carry the gospel. He also put a postal system in place. In the fullness of time, Galatians says, God sent forth his son. You think God knew what he was doing? He had everything perfectly planned out. Do you think Caesar Augustus knew what he was doing when he made the census? No. The census was for two reasons. Number one, for taxes, and number two, to see what men could serve in the military. Now, do we still have a census today? Every 10 years. The census in this day was every 14 years. And if you look again, chapter 2, and this registration was the first made when Quirinius was governor of Syria. How many censuses did they have before this? This was the first. This was the first. Now, because of Caesar Augustus was very intelligent and revered, he was called, believe it or not, the salvation of the world, the savior of the world. Can you understand why they said that? Because at this time there was nobody like that. But he was the fake savior of the world, wasn't he? The real savior of the world was born, and he didn't even know it. Nobody did. Now, let's see if why did Joseph have to go to David's city, Bethlehem? What's it say? Could they have voted or registered at their hometown? What do you think? Where do we vote? Do we go to our hometown? Mine is Ivyland, Pennsylvania. Do I have to go to Ivyland to take the census? No. But God planned it out perfectly. Perfectly. You know why he did it? Turn back, see if you can find Micah. This will be a challenge. Book of Micah, chapter 5. Prophecy. That's right. This prophecy was 700 years before Jesus was born. Micah chapter 5. Micah chapter 5. I'll give you a minute. This is kind of unique. The prophet Micah was a minor prophet, predicted that Jesus was to be born in Bethlehem. Look at chapter 5, verse 2. But thou, Bethlehem Ephratah, that's what it was called in the Old Testament, though thou be little among the thousands of Judah, yet out of thee shall come forth unto me that is to be a ruler in Israel. Now stop for a second. Was David a ruler in Israel? Could Micah have been talking about David? No, he was already dead. Yeah. So basically, there's no question about who Micah is talking about. Whose goings forth have been from old and from everlasting. What does that say about Jesus' existence? He's been forever. He's been forever. So there's no doubt that Micah is talking about the Savior, the Messiah. Okay? Now go back, if you would, to chapter 2. Now, Bethlehem was a pretty obscure place. It was small, but it was the birthplace of David and the hometown of Mary and Joseph. And Mary too, she was in the line of David. How long were they there in Bethlehem? Who wants to tell me? Probably never thought about this. How long were they there? Any ideas? Yeah, then they went to Egypt. It says here that they were there until she had the baby. but we don't know how many days it was. Nobody knows how many days it was. Now, there were no place for them in the inn. Now, when we think of an inn, we think of Holiday Inn. We think of all the different motels that we have. Did they have them in those days? No. There were guest rooms that they had that people would stay in. It was just a room. But there really actually wasn't an inn like we think about it today. Now, the guest rooms probably were all taken up by Roman soldiers, Roman authorities, people that were there to do the registration. There was no place for them, no place at all. Now, if you keep going, all went to be registered, verse 3, everyone to his own country. And Joseph also went up from Galilee out of the city of Nazareth into Judea, under the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was the house and lineage of David, to be registered with Mary, his espoused wife, being great with child. Now, here's a question you probably don't know. Was Mary and Joseph married at this time? Okay. Matthew says that was Joseph's wife. If you look in Matthew, you'll see it. Here, he says that they were betrothed. Now, if you think about it, why do you think there's a discrepancy there? Which were they? That's homework. That's homework. No, they were not living as man and wife. And I think you just answered the question. That's why it's called espoused here. They had not come intimately together. Consummating. Yeah, they hadn't done that. But there was a marriage ceremony. You can look at that in Matthew chapter 1. Okay? Now, did Mary have any other children after this? What does the Catholic Church say? She was a virgin forever. Never had any other children. Huh? Yeah, he had 4 brothers, James, Joseph, Simon, and Judas. And he also had sisters too. And that can be found and verified in the scriptures, okay? Now, it says here that when she had the baby, and verse 6, and it was that while they were there, the days were accomplished that she should be delivered. What clue does that tell you how long they were there? What do you think? Just days. It didn't happen simultaneous that night. They were there over a period of time, at least days. Verse 7, she brought forth her firstborn son, wrapped him in swaddling clothes, laid him in a manger, because there was no room for them in the inn. All right, let's look at this just a little bit. In these days, they had shelters, I'm going to call them. They were 4 walls and 2 floors, usually. When people would come traveling, would they come by themselves, or would they have to have animals to travel with them? Had to have animals. Adjacent to every place there was a shelter, there was a kind of a place for the animals to go. Camels, sheep, pack animals. You know, around every Holiday Inn, there's a parking lot, right? Okay, same idea. Same idea. They had to have a place for their animals. As I said, there were 2 floors. The bottom floor was where the animals were, and usually the upper floors where the people went. Now, what do you think it smelled like there? Manure, urine, feed, animals. Animals stink, don't they? Huh? Yeah, but this is the place Jesus Christ was born. We'll look at that in just a second. It says they wrapped him in swaddling clothes and laid him in a manger. What is a manger? Feed trough. It wasn't anything but a place where the animals would eat. Now, what do you think? While he's laying in the feed trough, did the animals know not to bother him? No. It was not the most sanitary, sweet-smelling, clean place to be born, especially for the Son of God. Now, swaddling cloths, what does that mean? We've heard it all our lives, right? These were strips of cloth that they would tear, and they would wrap the baby tightly, his arms and his legs and his whole body. The reason they did that was three things really. For security reasons for the baby, so he feels secure. For warmth. And did you know they also did that so his bones would stay straight? Because the swaddling cloths that they had were tightly wrapped and would keep his bones straight during this time. Now, was he treated like every other baby that was born? What do you think at first? Was there anything special? No. They laid him in a manger in a feed trough. This was not the best conditions, but it was what Jesus was born in. Now, let me ask you a question. Why did Jesus have to come to earth like this? Could he have come in an entourage with a halo on his head with royal robes? Why did he go to the dirtiest, filthiest place in all of Bethlehem to be born? Anybody know? When he lived his life, did he have a halo on his head? Robes? No. Who did he come for? Sinners. Isn't it a nice thing to think about that Jesus came to this earth, came all the way down from heaven to this earth into an atmosphere that was filthy, rotten, dirty, sinful, the smell of animals, fires, burnings, manure, feed. He came all the way down here just for us. What are we? Dirty, rotten, filthy, smelling sinners, right? He came to seek and to save those that were lost. So there's really no other way he could have come. He came the way he lived for us, for sin and wretchedness that we have in our lives. That's what these 7 verses, I think, tell me, that that's why he came and how he came. Now, what about all the stuff that goes on at Christmas? Do you think anybody's going to tell the story like this around the Christmas tree? No. That's why I did that this morning. I've encouraged you each week for the last 2 weeks to tell somebody this Christmas season about Christmas, what it really means. It's not mistletoe, Santa Claus, presents, lights, Christmas trees. They're all nice. I'm not condemning that. But what I want to say is we need to share the truth about what Christmas really is. Any questions or comments? Yes?
You can't touch the candy cane, though. That's specifically Christian.
Oh, is it?
Absolutely. It's got Christian fruit.
Red and white, yep.
And it's a shepherd's robe.
Yep. Good, Tom. Just ruined my whole sermon. Go ahead. What else? Any other questions or comments? Did this help you at all this morning? I know I didn't preach. I mostly talked and read, but it's time for us to get things prioritized in our lives. And the only way you'll do it, and the only place you're going to hear it, is here. You're not going to hear this anywhere else. And we need to be aware of it and practice it. Because the world is going to hell in a handbasket. Every place you look, we're running out of time. So don't waste your time. Tell somebody the real Christmas story. All right? Let's have a song.